Welcome to A Bit of Curiosity. I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. I'm excited today to have Julian Carr on here. Julian and I have known each other for quite some time. But to give him a little bit of an intro, Julian's a soon-to-be dad, which we'll get into a little bit. Professional
Hey,
skier,
close
is
that.
also an epic ski cliff jumper. He's a mountain runner, entrepreneur, race director, X Games gold medalist, rider. Also holds 2 world records in cliff height on skis. In the summer, he's either directing epic mountain races or out running, and in the winter, you'll find him skiing and hucking off big cliffs all around the world. He's also working on the side, restoring classic Broncos, and then he's got another startup rolling that does retro-style mats for classic cars. Julian, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, man. Really excited to sit down and chat, man.
Yeah, likewise. So one of the things that I like to do right off the bat is let's get into a big question, right? Like we want to dive into our curiosities here. So tell us a little bit. So, like, what's it like to take that leap when you're hucking a cliff on your skis? Like, it's one thing
it's
to jump into
unworldly.
water, but another thing like into some powder. Like, talk us through that.
It's just unworldly, you know. I could go on and on and on, but you know, the process to get to the point of that kind of confidence and clarity is quite the journey mentally. But you know, just the pure physical awesomeness, and you know, seeing a visual that you know very, very, very human beings have ever seen. It's just quite a treat. It's just a strange thing to process because we really don't have any cognitive processing for that kind of experience. So it is literally so bizarre, but so beautiful at the same time. It is crazy though.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, and I like there's guys that are jumping off of stuff with squirrel suits and parachutes and kites and all kinds of stuff, but when you're hucking a cliff, like you're just free falling.
Yeah, when you serve yourself up with no, you know, literal safety net, and you have to rely completely on your own assessment abilities and abilities in the air to land in a way that you know you're going to be okay. Like I said, the journey to get to that kind of confidence and clarity is empowering. You know, it's almost like you know, it's Zen. It's a pretty crazy practice in mindfulness, but that's what it is. And you know, you're in nature. You're connecting with nature. You're slowing things down, and you're kind of tuning into your environment. So it's a very beautiful experience. It's definitely not what most people would assume is a adrenaline fueled, just send it mentality. It's a very slowed down, become, you know, mindful practice. And then once you ski away laughing, that's when the adrenaline comes. So it's definitely this really cool balance of the both.
Does it ever feel like time just kind of pauses when you're in the air?
Oh yeah, I'll have multiple streams of conversations going through my head, and it's a complete time warp because I'll have these fully thought out, you know, paragraphs worth of processing, many of them, and then after the experience happens, it's like all that rich experience, all these big conversations I had in my head were milliseconds of actual time. So it is definitely a time warp. It is unlike any other thing I do in life that gets you into that headspace.
Yeah, that's crazy. So how does that mind shift, how does that mentality, that mindfulness, how does that translate into other areas of your life?
You know, just the art of seeing something from A through Z and visualizing it and thinking things through to the point of 100% clarity has certainly trickled into my life with the businesses I've founded, my personal relationships, and just, you know, my character in general. So very grateful for, you know, my gravitation towards doing something that requires that much comprehensive mindfulness, because it's certainly shaped my character.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so my first introduction to you, let's see, we've known each other for a dozen years probably at this point, right? And
Yep.
my first introduction to you wasn't as a skier. Like, I didn't know you as a skier. Like, you were a mountain runner that was building an apparel brand at the time, and then you were gonna shift. It was hats and shirts pretty much, right? And then you were kind of, okay, we're gonna take that brand and it's gonna become the sponsor brand of this race series. But I think, and we'll get into that too. But I think most people that know you or know of you probably know you as a big mountain skier, and probably more so as one that drops off big cliffs, right? You've been featured in multiple magazines, right? Like you've got an so your X Games gold medal, was it in cliff jumping or was it just in skiing, like in skiing generally?
Well, what won me that X Games gold medal was doing this beautiful front flip off about a 70-foot cliff in the Wasatch backcountry. Okay. And it was the only year they did a photography category. So it was pretty awesome. There were, thousands of entrants, and then it whittled down to 7 finalists. And they had big photos up in the village in Aspen. They had voting. And then I thought that when I first heard about it, I was like, it's not going to be like a main event kind of thing. I'm like, it probably won't be that cool, but sure, And we did it, and then when it actually became part of the finalists, we were the only American duo. All the rest were from various other countries, and the attention on it was actually almost overwhelming. I was very surprised, and then it was a part of the main broadcast. They did an interview. Primetime X Games got the full-on X Games medal sent to me. Good prize money, all that good stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Ended up being a very cool X Games experience. I thought, just because it was a photo category, it would just feel very removed and not a part of the whole show, but it was actually the opposite. So quite honored to be able to say I got that X Games gold medal.
That's rad. So front flip off of the 70-foot cliff. To kind of take us back, when was the first time you decided, okay, I want to jump off something of decent size? When I was in high school, I had a buddy that was like, hey, let's go learn to snowboard. So we grabbed a couple of boards and we'd go up to Snowbird right below the resort, and there's a mine shaft up there. I don't know where it is today. I'm not even sure. You probably do, but we would go jump off of that thing, right? We'd hike up, we'd strap boards to our feet, right? And we'd go down and we'd jump off of this, and it was cool. It was a little bit of an adrenaline rush, but we're talking 6 feet maybe, right? That's nothing, right? But when you decide okay, I'm gonna go something bigger than a basketball hoop, at that point I feel like you're dropping off something decent. But then you start to go 40, 50, and what's your highest is now 150 feet? Is that right?
220.
220. Okay. So, but at what point are you okay, this little bunny drop off of 12 feet isn't doing it for me. I want to go something crazy.
Well, I mean, that curiosity and, just gravitating towards that whole concept, every human being wants to fly through the air, just because we're not built to, and it feels amazing. And ever since I was a little kid, same thing. I was always trying to find, catch air. I just loved catching air. I had a trampoline in the backyard. I lived on that thing.
Yeah.
I did lots of gymnastics. I'd always get distracted by the foam pit. I was constantly jumping into the foam pit, climbing up into the rafters when the instructors weren't around, and bomb dropping 40 feet from the rafters of a warehouse into the foam pit. I just intuitively knew how to relax my body, and that the foam would take that impact, and that I'd share kind of my energy with the foam and not be a tight, wound up piece of energy falling into it. I'm I gotta spread out my energy with this foam and it'll be completely fine. I just understood that as a little kid. And so I had a roof jumping club with my buddies in my neighborhood. So we'd cruise around little 8-9-year-olds and try to find roofs to jump into, sloped grass hills and whatnot. And yeah,
what does that look like? Walk us through. So a roof jumping club, I'll confess, I jumped off my roof, but it was onto my trampoline, and I felt relatively safe, right?
There you go.
Springy. But jumping off a roof onto a sloped hill, just jump and roll, is that the idea?
Yep. Yeah, we called it.
How many of you broke bones doing this?
There's a few bloody noses, a couple broken fingers, a couple, this and that. But for us that really stuck around, we called it an Akita roll. And it was just collapsing your weight and rolling with that energy of coming into impact with the ground. And with the sloped angle, you wouldn't feel it. So I think I've just always loved catching air. I mean, I remember sledding when I was a tiny kid and building like these little cheese wedge jumps, getting like so much speed from the top of the hill. And I'd hit these jumps in my sled, and my buddies would stand under the jump and hold their sled straight up. And I'd clear them by like 10 feet and then just, blow up on the landing, but relax and barely even feel it. So I just have always loved catching air. And so, it's kind of limited by how big you can go on a sled, how far you can jump from a roof, falling off rafters from 30, 40 feet as a little kid in the foam pit. That's kind of the maximum of what I was able to experience. And I started skiing in 8th grade, and, being in Utah, of course, we have some of the best snow on the planet. And when the powder's deep, that direct correlation of being like, oh, this is a foam pit. Like,
Yeah.
the entire mountain landscape now with these skis on my feet, it's a big foam pit.
It was just a giant foam pit.
Just like you said, catching 10 feet of air is amazing. And I just incrementally and slowly increased that comfort zone. I started hitting 5-foot jumps, 10-foot jumps, finding a 10-foot rock to jump off of, and having a ball and crashing, landing some of them, trying 360s, trying flips, trying everything. And by 10th grade or so, I kind of had the hang of skiing. It kind of came naturally to me, luckily, and I had really close friends that were very good at skiing, so I was always keeping up with them and studying their technique. But for whatever reason, I always just kept wanting to expand my comfort zone with airs, and it just kind of never stopped throughout my whole career. So there was never like this, oh, I'm just going to go do a 150-foot cliff out of nowhere. There's certainly a journey, a big journey that got me to the point of that whole story of growing my comfort zone from a 5-foot jump in 8th grade on skis to 220 feet 15 years later. But that's all I can say is that the study and the mindfulness and the practice, it all came from that first 5-foot jump. I just kept at it and kept growing my skill set and kept focusing and applying myself, and I was very passionate about it. And next thing you know, and it's crazy to say it, but I was comfortable with the 200-foot cliff, and that's absurd. That's totally absurd. I get it.
Well, I think and to your point, like what we mentioned earlier, right? Like it translates into other things, right? Like when we become comfortable with just the mindset of it, right? Like obviously you're physically capable to do it. You've practiced, you've done a lot of it, right? There's the physical side of it, but a lot of it comes down to the mental side of it. And in this aspect, it's not like a Michael Jordan, I'm going to go out on the court and I'm going to play harder than you. But it's this like just transcendent moment almost, right? Like stepping outside of the body and saying, okay, like one of the things that you pointed out that I think is super interesting, right, is that you taught your body to relax, right? Like, and I think, and that's powerful, right? Like a lot of us, when we try to do some of these things, right? Like I've never done a flip on a tramp, because I just get so nervous and my body tenses. That right? Like, but that tenseness also not only prohibits me from doing it, but it will also cause me to get hurt if I stay that tense, right? And so finding that way to just take the mind to relax the body becomes this transcendent experience, right? And I think like we can look at that, we can apply that to anything, whether it's business, whether it's parenthood, whether it's relationships with our significant others, right? Like any of that stuff, it requires us to kind of just let everything relax and just be present. And I think that's a powerful example. And as you go approach a 220-foot cliff, right? Like that it should, like for most of us, it's like, no thanks. Like, not me, right? Like, because that like 220 feet, that's a lot. Like,
Yeah, it's definitely, you get into that arena of significant bodily harm can happen at those kinds of heights and distances. So you have to really have that clarity. And it is interesting flying through the air and having to be critical to be supremely relaxed, like more relaxed than lounging on the couch watching your favorite TV show. You have to be more relaxed than that, like have to be. Your life depends on it. So it's very interesting to do something that intense and must critical relax, because if you do not, you can get hurt or worse.
yeah, and I assume conditions have to be ideal as well, right? Like,
Oh yeah, step one is conditions and inspecting the landing. I think I mentioned it to you before, but I've skied 4,000 or 5,000 days in my life, and I've been fortunate enough to hit cliffs over the height of 50 feet. Of those 4,000 days, maybe 200 or 300 of those days were those days that had the right conditions. So you're usually just shredding, enjoying skiing, enjoying the sport. And then when those days do happen where the conditions are just right, you really got to seize the opportunity. And that's what's so interesting about it too, the mental part of it, because you can you always want to say next time. You always want to, like, when something's scary, you just kind of want to pay attention to that fear and be like, next time. But with big cliffs and the right conditions, like, those conditions maybe come around once a year, twice a year, or 0 times a year. So those days when it happens, what I learned was it's never not scary. You have to really process the fear and find a way to harness it and fuel your thinking, fuel your assessment, fuel your ability to go find the clarity. And if you kind of walk through that fear, process it, it transfers, it turns into confidence because you did face it. And usually, if something's scary, and you should listen to fear because it's usually correct. But in regards to big cliffs, man, when you're up on top of a precipice in the wintertime, and it's not like diving boards or jumping off stuff into the water, you can always go find a static environment to jump into water, always. But you can't on skis and snow. So when it happens, it's like thrust upon you, and it's scary. It's super scary. So to really walk into that fear and process it and get to the other side is quite the mental journey. It's very, very cool.
so when you've decided, okay, the conditions are perfect, like, you've inspected the landing, and then you get up to the top, what does that look like? How long does that process take before you're like, okay, let's go? Like, because I think for most of us it would be like, okay, I'm not, nope,
Yeah.
wait, nope.
Oh man, it's there's this really cool cliff in the Wolverine Cirque that's backcountry in the Wasatch that's in between
just off of
Little and
Brighton
Big
there,
Hollow
yeah.
Canyon. Yeah, and there's this amazing cliff back there. It's about 150 feet on average on any particular year, and this amazing skier that pioneered it back in the early 2000s. His name is Jamie Pierre, and it just blew my mind. I was like, that is so wild that he figured out how to do that. And he'd done quite a few other pretty big cliffs. And at that time, my comfort zone and cap was around 50 feet. So seeing a couple of these guys, and Jamie in particular, hitting these bigger cliffs, I just couldn't it just made no sense. It was impossible. And it was frightening. And I went up to that cliff he did in Wolverine Cirque in the summertime, and I found the takeoff. And I just hung out there, and it was such a intense place to be. And I just wanted to be in that kind of an environment to process it, because I'm like, well, the more I can spend time in this kind of environment, maybe it'll translate to the winter that I'll be more comfortable. But I just sat at the edge of the cliff for a couple hours and looked at the landing, saw where the boulders were, the trees, and the orientation of how you take off when you step back 40 feet. It's edge of the world. So I was looking out at the horizon, making connections to where the sweet spot was in the landing to aim on the horizon. And just things like that came to me, and it was so intense, still so scary. But, I ended up being able to hit that cliff about 3 or 4 winters later. And so that one obviously was a 4-year journey. But there's been plenty of other big cliffs that I've hit where I've been able to assess and execute within the span of 2 or 3 hours. So it's a very, very intense 2 to 3 hours, because there was one in Whistler I did that was about 190 feet, and I'd been looking at it across the valley for about a month when I was up there, and it was always just a fantasy. A lot of these cliffs are always just fantasies that I visualize and daydream about.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the conditions come in, and 60-inch storm happens, and we get early ups because we're filming a movie project, and there I am on top of a 180-foot cliff I've been staring at from across the way, but I've never actually stood on it. I've never actually assessed it. So it was terrifying, though. Being on the edge of the cliff, it was so scary. Everything in me wanted to get out of there. And, I do my routine, my protocol. I was like, you didn't come up here to see if this was going to be scary or not. It's going to be scary. You came up here to look at the takeoff logistics and look at the landing from up here. And the first step is is this possible? You'll go down to the landing and probe, but first things first, is this even possible? And you need to make that assessment. So I'm up there super scared, and I'm breathing through it. And I finally, really critically look at it. And I was almost part of me was man, I really hope it's not doable because I'm so scared. And then after staring at it for 10 minutes and really making sense of it, I'm like, oh man, this is possible. This is possible. So I'm like, okay, go check the landing. And so I ski down, check the landing. Man, it is unbelievably perfect. Good to go. So obviously all that 100% fear that I had after assessing and seeing, okay, it's possible, and then going down the landing and probing, that fear turned into 80% fear. And then,
was it ever
back.
You get down, because you talk about at the top, right? You're oh shoot, now I'm gonna have to do this, right? Because it looks great. Then when you get to the bottom and you probe through it and you check it, what did that feeling come back? You're oh shoot, now I got to do it. Or was it okay, this, because it sounds like it's shifting from this, I really don't want to do this, to okay, this is going to happen. And
well, it's never, I don't want to do it. I always want to. It's just always so scary.
Yeah.
And, that's what stands in front of you.
I think there's the things that we desire, right? Okay, I want to do this, but when we get right there, it's I want to do it, but I want an excuse not to, right? To some degree, right?
Absolutely.
Because I don't want to push myself. I don't want to push myself that far.
No, after probing, it's you start to see a glimpse of that confidence, and that's nice. That's a nice feeling, but you're far from, the clarity. So you go back up, and it took me about 4 hours of being on the takeoff and visualizing, and finally got to that point where calm mind, calm body, absolute clarity, full body visualization, 100% clarity on how to do it, how to proceed, and then execute. But everything in me, when you first get up there, there's been hundreds of cliffs where it's just no way, man, this is way too scary. I'm out of here. But then you're well, just go through the protocol and see what happens. And obviously there's been hundreds of cliffs that were scary for a good reason, because there was something about the takeoff that didn't work to get your trajectory right, or there's some rocks, or there's one tree in the landing, or something makes it so that, okay, I can't do this. And then you do walk away. Yeah. But you just keep thinking through it until you're no, I can absolutely do this. And it's a very, very 4-year or 4-hour experience,
I think that's a powerful thing too for a lot of us, right? There are limitations outside of our control that make things not worth the risk, right? A couple of years ago, I read the book by Stephen Kotler, The Rise of Superman. Yeah. Does that feel like your life sometimes?
Well, I've actually worked on a workshop with those guys. We did a 3-day workshop where we did, you know, those guys are fascinating, and, you know, their ability to think through kind of where some of these athletes' minds are at is very cool. So it's very fun to hang out with those guys for a few days and try to transfer some of those very cool lessons and things that, you know, are part of how I proceed with dangerous stuff to just some ordinary people who were there that were very interested in that kind of stuff. So it's fun to try to transfer some of those things to, it doesn't have to be something crazy, you know, it can certainly be just your everyday life, or whatever skill level you're at in any particular sport, including skiing. Like,
Yeah.
you can certainly apply those things because, you know, like I said, listening to your fears is usually a good idea, but sometimes some very profound things can come from just trying to understand what you're scared about, you know?
Right.
And if you can untangle that very complex feeling and emotion, you can have some pretty amazing breakthroughs in your life, personally and physically.
No, I love that. I think that's a powerful statement right there, Julian, is like analyzing our fears, right? Like, what is it that scares me, right? Like, is it just the drop, or is it actually like I'm afraid because this cliff doesn't feel safe, or there's stuff at the bottom, right? Like, or am I just afraid of the event itself, right? Or am I afraid of standing up in front of that 1,000-person audience and giving a lecture? Like, is that what I'm afraid of? Or am I afraid that I'm going to trip and hurt myself on the way up to the podium or whatever, right? Like, if I'm just afraid of the thing itself, I need to figure out a way to overcome that. But if there's like other things outside of that, right? Like, maybe I'm afraid because I don't know this subject that I'm going to go speak on, or I don't know enough about this business. Okay, well then I need to go learn, I need to analyze, maybe I got to find a different cliff, for example, right? Like, and I love one of the things that you pointed out, like you were hucking 50-foot cliffs. Like, this was, okay, I'm comfortable here, right? Like, this is good. But it was seeing somebody else that had been there, right? Somebody else that had pioneered it for you. And you've now been able to pioneer certain things. But it was that initial pioneer. And that's what I like. That's one of the things that I love that Kotler points out, is he talks about, like, the more we see people doing these things, right? Like the rise of Red Bull, the rise of X Games, right? Like, these things are causing us to push our limits because we're seeing other people push their limits, right? Like, and
Absolutely. That was part of it. I was like, we're both human beings, and if he can do it, I can do it. That was literally the narrative I had in my head. I was like, if that other human being with the same physical compensation as me can do it, I can do it. I just have to figure it out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we need to take the intellectual side out of it, or the logical side out of it to some degree, right? Like, and because like when I started Ultra 15 years ago, like we were 3 dumb 20-somethings that were like, okay, we can go take on Nike, Saucony, Adidas, Brooks, right? Like, we didn't believe any different, right? Like, we didn't accept the idea that, no, you can't go up against the biggest shoe behemoths, right? And now Ultra's grown to the point where it's a global brand. It's going to do $200 million this year. It's owned by VF Corp, right? Like, we did that. Plus, the industry has brought down heel heights. It's changed the view of how it approaches the shape of footwear. Like, all of these things have changed across the industry because 3 dumb 20-somethings decided we're going to go and start a shoe company, right? Like, and so sometimes you got to take the intellectual out of it, right? Like, because at the top of a cliff, right? Like, all logic says you shouldn't do this.
Yeah, no, it's powerful stuff when you believe in your own path. I mean, that's part of my journey as a professional skier, is hearing so much rejection, is like, you know, trying to solicit companies to work with you and hearing so many no's. But having that resolve in yourself to be like, well, they're making a bad decision. And so not letting other people define your potential is also a huge thing that I'm sure you encountered so much, you know, I don't think rejection's the right word, but you guys certainly had to blaze your own path with lots of barriers. But just to
We had lots of
believe and to
retailers
have,
tell us it was a dumb idea.
exactly. But to have that resolve and be like, no, I'll show you, is an interesting personality trait. Because I think the majority of people, when they start hearing no's from, personality of that industry, gatekeepers of those industries, people that have that kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but power, people that hold the kind of the gatekeepers. But when people in that industry that you're chasing are telling you flat out, you don't got it, kid, or this shoe design is ridiculous, it's never going to work. When you hear that stuff, to have resolve to push through not just one or two of them, but hundreds of barriers like that is a pretty interesting thing. So that's certainly part of the journey on the cliffs, is like there's thousands of things to be scared about, and just to focus on the illuminated path of how to have success. There's obviously thousands of ways you could do it to get hurt, or thousands of ways to start a company and fail. But if you can just focus on that illuminated path of success and be aware of how you could fail, but to keep focusing on the successful path and have that resolve is pretty empowering. I think it's funny because I think when I first started the Cirque Series mountain races, we, our first shoe sponsor was you guys, and we had an Ultra arch, and it was so cool because I heard so many people in the run industry that were like, hey, your races are too short, it's never going to work. So obviously to hit someone up like you, they're like, this looks cool, I see what you're trying to do, I'm going to support it. So it was very cool. You're one of the very small number of people of the hundreds of other companies and high-level athletes that were like, this is never going to work. But I was like, well, I think it's going to. So that's what I mean. It takes that resolve, and you end up connecting with people that do see your vision, or you get enough traction, or you get enough, how to just show that, some kind of like proof of concept that suddenly people are like, oh, I get it. And then suddenly you believe so much in your idea that other people start to. And like you said, you've helped shape the entire shoe industry globally in certain ways. And so it's such a cool way to live. And along the lines of what you just said too, about just three college kids from Utah, have put an impact on the shoe industry globally. I've always been fascinated with, throughout all of human history, billions and billions and billions of people are at the benefit of such a small number of great thinkers and inventors, So we all live this great privileged life. And when it really boils down to it, all these great inventions and breakthroughs throughout all of humanity have been such a small number of people. So why not let it be you that does something interesting or different or impossible? Why not let it be you that it shapes the shoe industry? Like, it is just such a small handful of people that shape what everybody experiences on this planet. So it's pretty cool to have a little taste of that. As far as the human experience goes.
Absolutely. And I think we talk a lot about mindset, right? Like mindset has a lot to play at that, right? And getting in that right mindset, kind of assessing our fear. I think that's if I'm going to take a nugget from today's podcast, right? It's okay, let's assess our fears, right? We have fears, but why are they there? Why do they exist? And then, okay, is that a real fear? Is that a worthy fear, or is it a fear that's just holding me back because I'm afraid of the unknown, right? Dropping off 220 feet, right? There's a lot of unknowns. You can do all of the work, right? Okay, I can take all the variables out, and okay, the bottom looks good, right? But there's still some unknowns, right?
Absolutely.
And so but it's working through those unknowns, and I think finding a practice of mindfulness, prayer, whatever, meditation, whatever that looks like, right? Yoga, in a regular journaling, in a regular consistent basis, can help get us to that place where we can truly analyze our fears, and then hopefully push through those fears. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that, right? Like, and there's like, any of us could do anything. Like, I firmly believe that we can do anything. We can do whatever we can dream up, we can accomplish. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of fortitude, right? Like, it's going to take a lot of just mental effort and energy to make that happen. But we have to get to the mindset where we can overcome those fears. So, speaking of fears or analyzing that, you're going to be a dad soon. You're going to have your first child here. Boy coming here in October, right?
Yep.
So it always changes when you hold him in your hands for the first time. Like, your world changes.
I bet.
But you're in this point. Like, I've got 4. I've gone through that experience a few times. But you're not there yet. But you're getting closer. Does it feel like you need to make a shift to the way that you approach some of these, like, more extreme adventures?
I think the curiosity is still strong in me. And like I've said, it's a practice in mindfulness. And, I value my own health immensely. It's not even a love of skiing. I just love to be a healthy human being and to have a long, healthy life with my child, and to show him mindfulness, show him what can be achieved safely by mindfulness first and physical after. I look forward to, we live at our cabin up here at 11,300 feet, and we have these, it snows a lot. So I already can't wait to, like, show him how to safely jump off our deck into the snow and stuff, and to show him all the parameters of when it's very dangerous, and how it can be done safely. So I'm already excited to just show him life and things that interest me, and always lead with the mindfulness of it. So I can't wait to transfer along those lessons. Will I be just as interested in, seizing the opportunity when the snow is really deep and I'm out skiing and I have opportunities to do big cliffs? I don't think it's going to change, just because, like I said, it's 100% clarity. And I want to be able to show my child that you can live like that, safely. So, I think it's just a personal interest equation. If I stay just as interested in putting my energy and my passion into those pursuits, because I think it's just a bandwidth thing. Because it does take everything you got to chase those experiences, because you have to apply yourself completely to put yourself in those positions. So we'll see if my passion stays in that lane, because you certainly need it to have those experiences. But regardless, I just can't wait to transfer those lessons on to my kid. It's going to be a blast.
That's awesome. So you talk about transferring those on, right? Like, did you receive those lessons from somewhere, or did you just get them through your own personal lived experience and just kind of discovering it on your own?
Well, it's pretty funny, because throughout my whole childhood, my mom was always, just very creative, always creating things around the house. And so I loved the idea of creativity. And then my dad was always taking me out on big hikes in the Uintas in southern Utah, 12, 15-hour hikes. And just finding that rhythm, finding a breath, and being out in nature became a part of who I was, and camping underneath the stars in southern Utah. And then, whenever we'd see a lake, for the most part, my dad would always go look around and find a safe place to go. He would love to swan dive. And he got up into the 70, 80 foot range swan diving into lakes. So as a little kid, I'd watch him assess, and he'd talk to me about how he did it and his game plan and the way he decided it was safe. So I absolutely saw my dad swan diving into pretty big dives into water. And I think just the whole comprehensive being out in nature all day long, and starting to tune into the environment and rationing your food, rationing your water, understanding where the sun is in the sky, and really being a part of nature. And those cliff experiences of him jumping into water, I just saw that as another way. And he kind of talked to me in this way, was that it was just another way to experience nature. We're able to tune in to your environment in just a different way. Usually we're out hiking or things of that nature. He's like, this is just another way we can communicate and hang out with nature. It can be safe. So yeah, I think him doing that was definitely a cornerstone. Like I said, comprehensively, just being out in nature so often and trying to understand, what other secrets, you can tune into when you're out in Mother Nature.
Yeah, I love that. I love, there's a couple of key things, right? Like, one, you saw, you were witness to your dad doing it, how he assessed it, right? Like, you kind of learned, okay, don't take unnecessary risks, but assess it, understand it, right? And then you can do big, hard things. But then also just the being in touch with your surroundings, right? Being aware, knowing what you're doing, right? I on one of my earlier podcasts, I had Joe Morton on, and he's done some cool things. And one of the things that he talks about is just being in awe and of our surroundings. And this morning I was on a bike ride, and I was just riding down Redwood Road here in Utah County, and there was a whole herd of antelope in the field. And I just kind of slowed my ride and just enjoyed watching these antelope out in the field, because I've seen them there before, but it's been years. And my daughter pointed them out the other day, and I missed them. I didn't see them. But then as I was riding, everything slows down when we're on foot or on a bike. It's so beautiful how much it slows down. We get in a car and we rapidly move past life, right? A lot of times these machines, they get us from point A to point B, but sometimes too quickly. But as we slow down, we can really analyze and see our surroundings and enjoy and be in awe for what's around us. And I think that's great. I love that your dad did that, right? And you hit on your mom's creativity, right? That's another way to be in awe and be present in our surroundings, right? For some of us, it's okay, nature may not be the thing, but creating is inherent within all of us. We all have the power and ability to create. And as we lean into our curiosities and we look and, okay, what can I create? What can I make, right? Whether that's sewing, whether that's painting, whether it's sculpture, whether it's creating awesome imagery, right? Through photography of doing a flip off of a 120-foot cliff, or whatever that might be, right? Find ways to creating a business, creating hardware, software, websites. Explore that, right? Dig into that. That's awesome. I love that. Those were two great parental examples for you. That obviously shows and reflects in how you live and how you approach life. And I'm excited to see how you pass that on to your son. You mentioned the Cirque Series a little bit. I loved being a part of it. I've done a couple of those races. I can tell you, anybody that's listening, that those are not easy. They may be short on paper. But that's what's great. I think that's what's great about your series, right? Is you're doing it in these epic, iconic locations, and they may be 4 to 6 miles, whatever, right? But it's 4 to 6 miles with a few thousand feet of vertical climb, so it'll work you over. And you just got back from Grand Tarkey, right? That was this last weekend, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're 5 races in our 6th race season, so we're getting to the tail end here. We got one more race next weekend at A-Base in Colorado.
That's awesome. So, going from athlete to now managing the logistics, you've been doing this for a decade now, right? I think you started the series 10 years ago. How is that? Is it ever hard to be okay, I just want to be out running it. I don't want to be, or maybe you get enough when you're going and marking the course and doing stuff beforehand.
No.
But are you ever sitting there on race day? You're okay, this is cool, but I'd rather be out there with everybody else.
Well, it brings me so much joy to see so many people having a genuinely good time. When you walk around and just see people beaming with happiness, is an amazing feeling. So to share the way I love to go out and have an adventure in the mountains. Our average race is 7 miles with 3,000 vert, and we always summit a serious high alpine peak. So it's a very cool mass experience for everybody to go summit a peak together. So when we're all down on the finish line hanging out before the awards and hugging and high-fiving and chatting and getting to know each other, just seeing that much happiness is incredible. And I've made a point ever since the first race in 2015 to run all the races. So although, throughout the week from marking the course and doing course preview videos or, getting up on the mountain to check stuff out, or obviously the hundreds and hundreds of people I need to communicate with on the logistics side, I still find great satisfaction in participating in the race.
You still are racing all the races yourself.
I ran them all. I have my staff radio in one hand, and it's an audit. It's a course audit. I'm sampling the product, of course, but
yeah.
I'm usually needed. I'll fix one of our arrow signs, making sure our flagging is the way it should be in all the key intersections. I'll help aid station people if they're backed up at all. If there's an injury on course, I always go and get hands-on to assist. And then where we place our volunteers and course marshals and EMTs, I always make sure they're in the right spot. So it's a working lap, absolutely, but I still find great satisfaction in doing the race. Because when I first created them, I got hooked on hiking Mount Olympus in Salt Lake there because I lived right by the trailhead, and that's 5 mile race with 4,000 vert. It's so demanding physically. It's crazy. But the experience you get as far from a mountain adventure perspective was wild.
It's still such a surprisingly doable mountain too, though, which is right. Like it's
so
straight
short
up in a lot of spots.
Yeah,
but it's so doable. And
that's why our races have worked really well, because I saw this path of like, hey, this is going to be super challenging, but, it's not an ultra. You're not out for 20 hours. It's not a 50K. You don't need to be elite. You don't need to put in a ton of training. This is still going to appeal to people that do, because it's still very hard. But, kind of the average person can hop off the couch and bag a peak. So that was kind of my vision, was like, hey, I want all ages, all abilities, and the pros there. Like, there's no reason why we all can't do this peak together. So it's been cool over the years to, same thing, have that resolve, believe in the vision, and now here we are. We host the USATF Mountain Running National Championship at our snowbird race. Races are sold out, and it's just really cool now and fulfilling, gratifying to see the races now are at my original vision. So it's very fun to be in the same high alpine place as I am on skis in the winter, but to have it in the winter or in the summer, it's, without having to worry about avalanches, it's such a, although inherently dangerous place to be still, much less dangerous to be up in those places in the summertime when you don't have to worry about the avalanche aspects of being up there. So it's just so fun to share my love with the high alpine year round with so many more people now. We've had ages 6 through 82.
That's awesome.
Which is just awesome.
Yeah, that's
so
so
to see
cool.
A little 6-year-old. It's amazing. We had a 6-year-old 2 years ago in our Alyeska race, and that race is very technical. We see 7 and 8-year-olds almost every race, but this Targhee race we just did last weekend, we had another 6-year-old. So just to see the joy and the triumph in those little kids' faces, it's just unbelievable. Like I said, it keeps me motivated to keep plugging away and making sure we produce the races very well.
That's awesome. So you're at 6 now. Are there plans to expand, or are you going to kind of keep it at 6 for a while?
We had 7 for a couple of years. So we were actually doing a race out in Switzerland, but we held off this year. We might bring it back. We'll see. It was just a lot of added logistics to go produce a race internationally. But we'll probably bring it back. But I think we're going to add a race in the Northwest. That's kind of the target zone, the highest on the priority list, and also out east. So I've always had it pretty content with the 6-7 races we've had over the last 4 or 5 years, but always been looking at the northwest area and out east. So I think we're going to go for it in the next couple of years.
Cool. There's no big circs out east, but
Well, that's part of the fun of and the challenge of creating these races is finding and establishing routes that are super cool. And I've definitely found little gem zones out east that actually have some pretty technical zones. So I'm pretty excited to figure it out.
There's some fun little mountains out there.
Yeah,
so
little.
we just like to make fun of them from out west here because our snow's way better than theirs.
Oh my gosh! Don't get me started on snow. I mean, those poor guys.
Julian, I want to wrap with a few rapid fire questions. So I want to hit you with these. You can answer as long or as short as you want. But let's just kind of roll through them and then we'll wrap. So,
cool.
So we talked a lot about fear today, but what frightens you?
Oh man, I think not like maximizing potential for me or for any human being. I feel like we get so complacent, we get so in our comfort zones, we get so like pacified by all the thousands of things that are entertaining that I feel like so few of us are maximizing our potential. So I still feel like I have a long ways to go and I battle the feeling of not being productive enough. And I feel like humanity certainly, there's a lot more potential to maximize.
Life's been made very easy for us, and sometimes that's to our detriment. So, what inspires you?
I think nature, being out there when you feel human and you feel primal. I always feel inspired.
That's awesome. What gives you hope for the future?
My little baby in October.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern in the world of bringing children into the world just because of the calamity and chaos, but it's such an amazing place still, though. Like
we talked about, I feel like maybe it'll be your child that's part of the network of human beings that make an impact in the other direction, that makes an impact in the world that betters humanity. Like, not everyone needs to be stuck in those confines. I feel like being afraid to have children because of the state of the world means you have no confidence in your own child contributing. That's where my head is at. Like, maybe my child will contribute. Like, maybe they'll be the ones that make a difference. Like that's where my head's at.
Yeah, that's deep. That's beautiful. I like that a lot. What is something that you would want to tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh my goodness. I would say, I don't know. That's a challenging one. Man, I would say life is going to be amazing and give myself a high five.
Okay, awesome. What book are you reading right now?
I'm reading a book about these Arctic explorers in the late 1800s on the USS Jeannette, and just the intense journey that their whole crew had up in the Arctic.
Interesting. Cool. What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
Man, I've read some good ones lately, but I've read this pretty interesting book. I can't remember the name of it, but it was about a small child about 4 years old that was abducted by kidnappers trying to get money from the parents, and it didn't work out, so they left this 4-year-old out in the jungle somewhere like the Philippines, way out there, and she became friends with this big monkey colony, and she lived with them until she was like 12 or 13 years old, and then finally figured out a way to get out of there. And then the rest of her life was pretty fascinating too, but just the way she talks about becoming part of this monkey colony for, from 4 to 12 years old.
So like a real life Jungle Book, huh? Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild read. Yep. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure if you Google those it's a pretty cool book.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
Oh man, I'm so fortunate throughout Cirque Series and my ski career and just personal cruising around. I think that my favorite one's probably, I'll just say the next one. I love traveling. I love exploring. I love seeing culture. I love seeing the world at large. It feels like it's the biggest thing to keep you humble and to understand how big this planet is and how many amazing traditions and customs and thoughts and beliefs, and spectacular, wild places, and also challenging places to be when you see places that aren't inspiring, and that are necessary parts of supply chains and keeping 7 billion people on this planet happy, to see and just be exposed to what is beautiful and the necessary uglies, I guess you could say, to keeping 7 billion people a part of this big network on this planet. It's like I said, equal parts inspiring and just eye-opening. So I'd say that my favorite place to travel is probably the next.
I like that. I like looking forward to that next adventure. I'm excited. I get to go to Costa Rica next week, so that'll be a fun adventure. I've been to Mexico, but more the resort side, right? So it's not like, but so to get to Costa Rica and get to the jungle a little bit and explore, I'm really excited.
Be so fun. Real quick, you know what I did last year after our Engelberg race in Switzerland?
Yeah.
My wife and I went to Greece, and we rented a car and drove up to Mount Olympus, and we hiked
nice.
the real deal Mount Olympus.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool to kind of just, circle the dot there, because obviously I wouldn't have started Cirque Series without falling in love with Mount Olympus and Salt Lake. So to hike the real one was pretty cool. But that's awesome. You're going to Costa Rica. I've actually done very little travel in those types of places on the planet. I'm always like a wintertime traveler, or high alpine mountain traveler. So going to the jungle and stuff is certainly on the list. I hope you have a blast.
Yeah, Greece is on the short list too. I haven't been there yet, but that's definitely on the short list. So I look forward to the time we can get out there. My daughter is like, "Yeah, let's do Greece for my senior trip," and I'm like, "Yeah, we could probably do that, as long as we get to do it my way."
Yeah, we went to like all the stereotypical places in Greece as well, like all the Parthenon, and checked out I can't remember the name of that little coastal village that has all the pools that you look over the whole ocean.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It starts with an S. I can't remember, but anyway, Greece
it's not Santorini,
awesome.
Is it? Is it Santorini?
Yeah, Santorini. Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. That's also quite cool.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful place from what I've seen. I'm excited to go explore it sometime here soon. So
yeah.
Julian, it's a pleasure. I appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. I love your background. I love what you've done. Hopefully people have gotten some things that maybe not many of us are going to go hucking off 150 plus foot cliffs on our skis, right? Or ever in any form or fashion. But the way that translates and that mindset can translate to the rest of our lives is powerful. So if people want to follow you, if they want to keep up with you,
check out probably Instagram, Cirque Series for the running company. Come out for a race. And Julian Carr for skiing and my general mountain adventures. If you want to check out my Broncos, check out Blake Broncos. And if you want to check out my retro floor mats, check out Doja Mat.
Cool. And Julian Carr will probably get taken over a little bit here in the next couple months with more baby pictures. So
it just might. Well, it's gonna
awesome, man.
Be
any parting words for us?
I'd say stay curious. And people are always asking how to get that, how to go pursue your ideas. And it's like, you got to just start. You got to dip your toe. You got to find your footing. And the best way to do that is just to begin. I think we all get into this, like, I got to wait until this or that, or, until things are just right, or I know exactly. It's just like, just get started, and you'll be pleasantly surprised by how much you learn, and you move forward, or you learn that maybe that's not the best idea and you stop or shift or whatever. So I'd say just start dipping your toe. That's my advice. Dip your toe.
I appreciate that. I think the ending words of beginning are great. We could spend another hour on just talking about getting started, but that's awesome. You've gotten started on a lot of great things. You've made some good things happen. It's exciting. I appreciate it, Julian. Thanks for coming on and joining us here on A Bit of Curiosity.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me on. My pleasure.